Greetings all. Welcome to another edition of the Enterprise Edge podcast. This is Mark Figueroa, CEO and founder of the Enterprise Edge. Very pleased to be with you this Monday with a very esteemed guest we have today from Microsoft. Georg Glantschnig is with us from Dynamics 365, and he is the CVP looking after Agentic ERP. Georg will have great things to share about not only where Microsoft is headed, but also what he hears from customers across all different industries and markets regarding how they are making decisions regarding implementing some of the emerging technologies that are available to companies today across the sort of the agentic landscape, which is moving very rapidly, to say the least. But before we get into any of that, please join me in giving Georg a proper welcome. Georg, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Mark. Happy to be here.
Great. Glad to have you. Well, let's get into it. You know, as we often do for folks who listen to this podcast on a regular basis, we'd like to get to know Georg a little bit. We'll start off with a couple icebreakers and then jump into some market questions and product questions, and then we'll end with a bit of a speed round to end the session. So let's get to it. You know, Georg has you've got a great history. You've been around enterprise tech for a long time. And your path has taken to where you are now, leading a key piece of where Microsoft is headed regarding ERP. You started back in the day at SAP, with R3 and in the trenches with customers. And obviously, a lot has changed since then. But I'm wondering, in those early days, we oftentimes look back early in our careers on lessons that we learned and perhaps tough lessons. And I wonder, are there any of those tough lessons from your early consulting days that really serve you well even today in your current job?
Yeah, Mark, it was a long time ago. As if I remember correctly, I think 97. I started as a consultant, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And Nokia was my first project. So I spent, I think, a year in Helsinki, headquarters, creating the first global ERP template, to roll out to the subsidiaries. And I think the most valuable thing I learned, basically, it was not about the software application. It was about the troubleshooting. So as consultants, you quickly learn that the first problem you see is rarely the real problem. Whatever used to tell you something, it's not working, it's doing the wrong things, but then you look at system logs and tell you a completely different story. And normally, the root cause is somewhere in the middle. And I still use exactly, a similar approach today, whether we're discussing AI strategies or, any kind of modernization efforts, or if you're leading large organizations, I spend far more time in, trying to understand the problem than just jumping to conclusions. As technology changes, every few years, and it's getting even faster if you look at the last couple of years. But I think, good problem solving doesn't. So at least that's still something I'm trying to keep.
Yeah, no, that's good wisdom for sure. And, and you've ascended to a key role in leadership, and leadership is one of those things that I think oftentimes people assume you just sort of pick up along the way in terms of being a good leader. And in others I've observed and myself try to practice that it's really a discipline unto itself and a skill set unto itself. And I'm curious, in your role as you lead teams there at Microsoft, others have described you as someone who's very good at helping people and teams understand sort of what's behind decisions that are being made, even if there isn't 100% agreement in those decisions, right? And you never have 100% agreement, but there's still this, how do you get everybody on board and rowing in the same direction, regardless of that level of non-unanimous agreement. And so I'm curious, how do you approach that with so many players at Microsoft? As fast as this market is moving, as fast as decisions are being made, as fast as products are being released, how do you marshal that unity amongst your team members in this day and age?
It's a really good point. Specifically, as you said, things are changing even faster, and decisions are getting even more complex. And maybe the easiest answer is, because I'm Austrian. I'm saying this because, Austria is a small country, as you know, so, and I think at least one thing, at least I like about our culture is, that we're not walking into a room assuming we are the smartest persons there. And I think there's also influenced with my leadership, maybe more than, all these management trainings and courses you're doing. So, my job isn't to convince everyone, that I'm right. It's more like my job is to make sure, that we have the best possible discussion before making a decision, and then basically make sure everybody understands why we made the decision. So I think I have learned over the years that understanding creates commitment. Agreement, of course, is nice, but I don't think it's actually required. So if people at least understand the reason, know their voice was heard, and see that the decision is consistent with our value and our strategies, I think that's usually rally people behind it, and you can go into pretty fast, committed execution.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of art and science in my experience, and I think that makes a lot of sense, and it is somewhat made more difficult given just the speed and the velocity that decisions are getting made, right? And even with large organizations like Microsoft. So that's great insight. We can't all be Austrian, but we all aspire to be, right?
At least in soccer, we would need more Austrians, to be the stronger team.
Exactly. Well, that's great. Well, Georg, let's get into some specifics about where you are at with Microsoft Dynamics 365, and specifically around sort of strategy within the ERP scope when it comes to AI innovation, agentic capabilities, and whatnot. And I think one of the topics that is keeps coming up in my travels and my interactions with basically everyone is as this sort of notion of an autonomous enterprise workflow process, right? That where does liability stand, right? Yeah. When you have actors that are human and agentic, and you have this sort of mix of AI operated, human led, human in the loop, right? This sort of hybrid of, agentic and human workflow. And how do you manage as a product leader and a business leader, things like governance? Like are there new lines that need to be drawn with regards to governance and compliance and liability when you have workflows that are taking action autonomously, right, with machines as opposed to humans, and obviously combination? So long way of asking that question around where does liability land if something goes wrong?
I mean, it's a super important but also complex question. We have learned really a lot. So, we try to be very early in the market, exactly, to just learn from our customers, what's working, what's important. So let me break it down maybe in a couple of different aspects. And the first one, at least, which is still fascinating for me, is what we really learned is that people are far more willing to forgive a human error than an AI error. So when a colleague makes a mistake, which happens every day, many times, they normally get a second chance. But when AI makes one, the whole trust disappears instantly, and everything is falling apart. And I feel a little bit similar. I know if you follow the autonomous driving conversations, as at least in San Francisco, as at least I felt it's pretty awesome how these cars are already maneuvering. And human drivers are involved in thousands of accidents every day just in US. But yet a single crash or stallment involving an autonomous vehicle often dominates the headlines. I think the expectations for AI are fundamentally different, and we expect this kind of nearly flawless execution.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, now mapping this to the ERP market, of course, makes this even stronger. Because there's no tolerance for these hallucinations. We're talking about, finance, or we talk about purchase orders. They are black and white. There is no gray in finance. So numbers,
right.
Yes, numbers don't lie, is the saying. So the consequences there are pretty significant. So in marketing, if AI gets it wrong, a customer gets a wrong email, or an ERP, you misstates your books. These are huge things, and that's exactly why agents in ERP, we have to put them inside what we call these guardrails. So of course, a single agent, can look across ERP data. It can be planning outputs. It can be supplier emails. It can be, policy documents. It can be conversations, employees had in teams, and they can basically draw these coherent pictures of, what's basically happening and what to do about it. And I think some of these logical steps and actions that agents can take, they can basically take on this, I call it the routine work, the runs inside your guardrails automatically. And we think about these guardrails basically in two buckets. So to your point, you really have to make this very, very predictable and secure, specifically in the ERP context. So I think we have these two things. So the first one, we have the ERP business logic. So these are all these rules, these regulations and finance controls that basically live in your ERP system. So I'm a strong believer these ERP systems are not going anywhere because you need this grounding. So there's no, at least I don't feel there's any reasonable explanation. Why would you rebuild these deterministic rules on an non-deterministic layer, at least in the next couple of years? So I just don't see the reason. And what we are using basically is the MCP server. So I assume maybe the listener have the context there. So that's basically how agents can communicate with your system. It's a communications protocol. So we use this MCP server so that basically agents work the systems and basically with the person, then they can basically not break beyond this foundational logic because we are exposing it, and this is not what an agent basically is making up. So it's working in these boundaries of the business logic. Yeah. And then the second thing, we have also the company policies, these rules your business is setting. They can live in this agent layer. Or it can be even a SharePoint document. I mean, as many policy documents in a company are, and basically agents can reference these documents. So if, for example, if an agent finds an alternative supplier, because the supplier maybe delayed a commitment, if it's within a certain price threshold, it can proceed basically on its own. And, of course, beyond that, the agent itself can bring a person in, as we call it, human loop. But, of course, give the context. These are the facts, these are decisions to make, and then basically humans saying, left or right. So I think that agents can even find, in this unstructured information, as we call like work IQ, as where we understand, who is communicating with whom, what are documents. In this unstructured world, it can also find, maybe situations in the past where decisions were made. And again, everything can be outlined and presented to humans to basically proceed with these decisions. I think, accountability never moves to the agent because, every decision leaves a trace. So you always know what agents are doing. So which, of course, actually gives you a much clearer way of understanding, what's happening, who is doing it. As ERP was always about, auditability, about traces. So I feel more like, we're trying to move people who are, I feel they're more like the middleware, you're kind of between your system and the business process. We're moving people more into, I call it like the agent boss who is directing agents to do things. But again, they're just preparing information for you, and you can basically then help deciding it. So from a meta perspective, how we look at it.
Got it. No, it's fascinating, Georg. I mean, gosh, I have another 50 questions about that, but maybe I'll just ask one follow-up, which is when you look at, that question presupposed that stuff does go wrong, right? When I asked you about where does liability land when something goes wrong, right? A mistake is made. And I wonder, are you tracking, I don't know what you call it, quality, precision, accuracy, as these agents roll into production and move to scale deployment? Are there metrics now that you pay close attention to that, regarding accuracy and precision and quality of output and integrity of the process execution, right? Is that something that you're looking at as a product stability and product maturation perspective?
Absolutely. So I would say this is almost the main task in this new world engineers are doing. So we call it the evals. So how do you create evals to understand, is the agent doing what the agent is supposed to do? And we are testing this, of course, when we develop these agents. So we do this internal testing, but this is not with customer data. It's just like, at least based on synthetic data, or at least the test cases, we are saying we are in a good shape to let this basically now go into customer systems. But of course, again, customer systems means, we have this private previews as a different stages. But of course, also in customer systems, we provide these evals for customers. So because as you know, every ERP system is a little bit different. So they can extend systems, they can configure systems. So it's important to understand, are the agents doing the right things in the context of a customer system, in the context of the customer data, with their extensibilities. And therefore, these evals are even more important at customer side. And to your point, Mark, of course, everything has a trace. So like, in finance, if a human is doing transactions, there's an auditability trace. And every agent has an ID. So there is no, somebody's messing up your system and you don't know who was doing it. So there is a trace, and you could say, okay, agent ID did this posting, but this agent ID is also connected to a user. So it cannot be a right agent running around there. So when for example, the head of the finance department, I want to have certain agent processes running there attached to me. And of course, I'm in charge that the things are also going well.
Interesting. And it's also trying to think of an example. You probably could better than I could, but in some cases, would it be fair to say that some agents, let's say, degrade, or maybe there are leading indicators of imminent failure or imminent mistake or imminent wrong move, right? Or is it more binary where there is no way to predict when an agent might screw up, right? Maybe it depends on process or the agent or the human overseer. But I just wonder, are there ways to anticipate and mitigate the failures and failure modes in agentic workflows, as opposed to just reacting to failures, so to speak?
So I would say from our experience, the more likely cases, you have, let's use expense management as one of our agent scenarios. You feel you have a good accuracy, understanding, invoices, hotel bills. In America, you have to itemize these things, super complicated. We have a pretty good, at least, view on the test data we're doing. So we're giving this then to our customers. And I would say you would see two scenarios. Maybe the quality decreases. And this could be, for example, these invoices are in different languages we have not really tested. Or these are maybe invoices of a different complexity, because, we don't know all the invoices in the whole world. So, but I think this is also a learning mechanism. Also we talk about maybe IQ. I know if you heard about it. So we have work IQ, which is kind of representing, the network of, who is communicating with whom, what are the documents involved. And we see a similar network on the business process side. You have business objects, how they interact, how the process goes. And we want to basically have when we say IQ, it's this intelligence, how things are connected, but we also want to learn. When I mean learning, I mean the customer wants to learn how their company works. So if they do, for example, expense management, maybe the agent failed and asked a human, whatever, I don't know what to do with this one, or I cannot assign it to the right cost item. So the human helps, but we're basically understanding the trace. So basically the customer can use this the next time. Oh, now I understood it because we have done it. So there's this kind of improvement over time why I think humans in loop are very important, to at least memorize and build up this intelligence also for the agents to understand, this is how this company works. And therefore I know now, maybe the first time it took me 20 different iterations to find the right path, which of course was expensive because it creates tokens. But now basically I have done this before. Now I can go the straight line. So we have these examples, there's many ways how you can drive from Seattle to New York. You can go via Mexico if you want, but maybe you would like to go the I-90 straight, and that's the same like IQ. It can help you to find the most efficient one.
Oh, that's great. Georg, you mentioned tokens. It's probably a good segue. We'll move on to the next topic, because we could keep going on agents for a long time. It's fascinating work that you're doing. But you think about the commercial side a little bit now. tokenomics as new words coming off the assembly line here. But I mean, as sort of SaaS models and SaaS monetization models and subscription models have historically been seat-based and user-based, obviously there's a lot of movement in the market with ISVs and ERPs changing the basis for consumption to things like, assets or outcomes or other, kind of drivers of usage, as the actors become less human or seat based, so to speak. So I'm curious where you are, where the team is at Microsoft with regards to these commercial frameworks, where you think you are now, where you're headed. What is the market really doing in your customer base? Or is this a demand? Is this something that you're pushing as opposed to customers asking for? Tell me a little bit about how you're thinking about this commercial evolution that's happening.
It's a fascinating one. And sometimes, if you have been in this industry a little bit longer, there is this saying, I think history is never repeating itself, but it often rhymes. Huh?
Yeah, that's right.
Because if you go back to a little bit of broad observation, I think every impactful technology shift was accompanied by a change in the underlying business model. When the industry, for example, moved from on-premise software to the cloud, the business model also moved from this perpetual license revenue to recurring subscription revenue. But I remember in the early beginnings, every customer said, I will never pay subscription. What the hell sense make this? And here we are. So I think something similar is happening when we move more to the agentic AI solutions. Also, I think over time, the business model will increasingly shift towards this consumption-based pricing model. And I think the reason is pretty simple. In the cloud area, if you really think about it, you create software, you run it in the cloud, adding another customer to the solution, almost came at zero marginal costs. It's not now completely true, but it was a very small amount of running 10 customers, 100 customers, 1,000 customers. It was the great scale of SaaS software by, every investor, of course, liked it because it was this predictable model of increasing revenue and basically your costs are not growing as fast. But now we're in a completely different economics because with agentic AI, every user you are adding interacts and consumes computes and tokens, which creates costs. So it's the scaling is a very different thing. So therefore, I would say consumption, at least based on the current dynamics, is absolutely necessary. And I think agents, they are talking a lot of this. We're taking off this undesirable repetitive work of people, so that people have more focus on what basically moves the business. So if I spend all day chasing last month's invoices to close a quarter, I'm not really thinking about how we will beat the next quarter's targets. So I think the benefits that the agents are bringing, it's just going to be these productivity gains, this decision velocity, and just a much more agile business. So I feel we are getting there. The conversation with customers are still, it's just not, the mental budgeting process doesn't really fit this consumption-based model. As I fully understand that, a CFO says, I need to know my budget for this month. It cannot be whatever, 10,000 and maybe it's 20,000. So I think there is, again, the same in the early days of the subscription billing when we moved to the cloud. And if you think back, how long did it take for recurring subscription models to become the dominant one? I think it was many, many years. So I don't think it's like switching overnight, but we see more and more customers maybe dealing with it and also finding the value.
Right. Yeah, it is fascinating. And it's kind of like you said, we can learn a little bit from the past, and even as many things happening now are unprecedented, there's still some instructive examples, and I think it's always a matter of, like you said, it's like taking friction out of a rapidly modernizing landscape where various things don't fit together the way they used to, right? In terms of budgeting and in terms of thinking about the predictability of your spend, right? As like you just said, as a finance leader, and it kind of requires an organizational agreement to take this journey, which is not a straight road. Oftentimes it's a windy road to say, okay, we're moving to a future state of how we plan for, consume, and leverage enterprise software. And we kind of have a map, but it's not perfect. And I think that's harder for some companies to digest and accept than others, in my experience. But I'm curious, how are your customers traveling with you on this journey? Are they aligned sort of mentally and strategically in terms of what commercial models are going to make sense for both parties? Or are you finding conflict, or how is this manifesting in your customer relationships?
I think, there's always two categories of customers. There's the early adopters who want to move fast. They see this maybe as a disruption, or they see this as an opportunity to maybe gain competitive advantage. Also, I would say they are moving with us very fast. And I mean, these are the right ones to, of course, experiment, because the one thing, and I mean, let's be honest, nobody knows how the future will play out there. So that's
Right.
Everybody can, of course, have opinions, but I mean, I assume your opinion is as good as my opinion. So we have to learn fast and iterate and make the right conclusions. And yes, there's of course other industries which are maybe not really saying, hey, I don't have to be the first one. Let the other ones figure it out, and we learn from it. But I would say from a conversation perspective, at least when we have our customer meeting, and so it's not like that they're pushing back and saying consumption doesn't make any sense, because as I explained, it kind of makes sense, because now every user is consuming something. As it's a very similar, like in engineering now, every engineer is consuming tokens to create software. So there's a very consumption-based metric to it. So that's how you can capture the value. But I think what customers really push for is transparency. How do they know what's consumed? Of course,
Right.
The ultimate goal would be, could you connect this to value?
Yeah.
I don't have the answer there. As I just know, already 10, 15 years ago, there was, I think, a time where we tried to do value-based pricing.
Yeah.
But I think these conversations at the end, it was a disaster, because I mean, at the end, you could not even agree how to measure the value, and then who is really driving this value. Was it now the software? Was it the customer? Was it the change process? I think this might be a little bit tricky, but of course, value-based pricing with consumption would be maybe the best one, but I think that's maybe the most tricky one. And we have this compromise where we are saying, which is maybe a good transition. You have a user model, as I think everybody agrees. We maybe not increasing our user base. Also, maybe you have your finance users, but your company is growing, and maybe you can do more and more with the existing user base. So I think there's an understanding that the user model itself is maybe not the great way of having a fair value capture for both sides. So we are trying to say, hey, you have a user, and every user gets, for example, a certain amount of tokens they can consume, as at least this is predictable. And then if you're going above these limits, you maybe would buy another package, a little bit like internet providers are doing. As at the end,
right.
They're kind of saying it's unlimited bandwidth, but if you read the fine print, they're saying if you go amount certain, then hey, let's talk about it, because you may be running a private hosting business. It's not anymore your own consumption.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's fast. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's interesting, because obviously what your customers are trying to do, what they're paid to do, is figure out the fairest ROI lens, right? How do we look at return on our investment, right? I mean, it's the rules of ROI have not been repealed, right? We're still looking for return, and so the question becomes, well, where is that return manifesting, and what form of value, and is it direct or indirect, and how do I attribute the right driver of that value, and fairly, and I guess and how do I protect my interests so that I'm not moving backwards from where we were on a subscription seat-based model, right? So that we're not somehow getting less value than we were before unknowingly, right? So I think there's a lot of well-intentioned inquiry going on now, in my estimation, not just your customers, but the world of enterprise tech buyers that are trying to figure out, how do you check all these boxes against this rapidly moving landscape, like you said, where it's very difficult to predict what's actually going to be true in 12 to 18 to 24 months, right? So lots, I mean, gosh, you guys are leading the way in so many areas. And the customer, maybe I'll just, so the dovetail into the next question. I mean, the customer is such a driving force for what you guys are doing, and what the best companies that are building solutions are doing, is that they're staying very, very tight with key customers. And we hear about the successes, right? We hear about, in particular, Microsoft customers that are out there and publicly talking, like Lifetime Products and Coca-Cola, and they're using actual agents, in areas like account reconciliation and areas like product change management. And they're attesting and testifying to process improvements and cycle time reductions. And they're actually giving words to some of these outcomes, which is fantastic because it's very powerful. It's helpful to you, right? But I'm curious about, before those successes happen and before those customers are willing to go on record to say, we got this return on our investment in this agent, there's got to be a lot of learnings that happened before that, right? And I'm wondering if maybe you have an example or two of customer outcomes that maybe were in the earlier days with agentic deployment, maybe at smaller scales, where there were failures or there were misses that really instructed you and elevated the game and got you to that success, right? We kind of get into the sausage making a little bit. What maybe some examples that come to mind.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many examples because basically you learn something every week, and I always say, you learn even more from failures maybe than from success. So these are the really interesting ones, as long as you don't take them too close to your heart. But the one big thing which now was surprising working with customers is, how, of course, quickly this technology evolved, but also how much or how fast basically customers moved and adapted, and raised their expectations. And I, at least, in my time now in this market, this is not true for every technology disruption. Mostly you have to almost like push it, and like, come on, it's a big case, let's do it. But not with AI. As I felt there was a huge pull from customers. And we launched, our first agents, also the ones you also mentioned, I think it's almost like 2 years ago. And it was by design, because we believed in this exponential technology shift. There is a first mover advantage. And, we built the agents, again, based on the knowledge we had 2 years. Of course, now in hindsight, I mean, it's sometimes even funny if you look at it. But basically, we tried to do it with the tools we had at this time. So when we delivered these first agents and we went to customers, I mean, they loved it. I said, that's a great example, as you call out the procurement agents, the account reconciliation agents. But then the customer said, hey, I have another 100 agents ideas. And we were thinking, it took us a real good time to deliver these 2 or 3 agents. We are not building another 100 agents. So somehow something didn't really add up in these conversations. And I think this was the first really fundamental shift we had to do, or as you maybe call it, the messy middle, that we had to rethink this model first architecture. So what does it really mean, model first? We're coming from this code first, as you program something in code and then you give it to customers. Now we're in this, how can a model basically solve a customer problem? And in this first generation of agents, it was a very tightly coupled combination. It was like an application code with prompts, with large language models, everything kind of meshed together. And these foundational models, I mean, I think every couple of months, they're improving. There's other models coming. They're getting much better. And of course, customers were expecting always running the latest models to get basically the best outcomes. And with our initial architecture, updating agents, it took us a huge effort to do that. And it reminds me a little bit, in the time when we moved to the cloud, the big thing we had to solve is, how do you ensure every one of our customers runs on the same code base? There is no there is no upgrades anymore. It's continuously delivery. You're always on the same innovation train. And now in the age of AI, we have a similar question. But how the question is now, how do you ensure every customer can always take advantage of the latest models or the models of their choice? It can also be a choice by costs. Maybe you don't need the speed or the accuracy. Yeah? And I think when we introduce co-work, as again now, I assume a little bit the context is known. I think all the puzzle pieces came together, and it was much clearer what does it really mean, agentic ERP. And if I break it down, as instead of waiting for Microsoft as the classic conversation we had in the past, I have a feature request and they talk to us and then we say in 6 or 9 months maybe we can deliver it. I think there's now a different way, and you don't have to wait for the agents. Basically how we changed our thinking is through the MCP server, we are basically exposing all the capabilities an ERP system has. So anything a user can do in our systems, and this is not now ERP, it can be CRM, any system we have there, Fabric, now an agent can do. And what we achieved with this step was that we are kind of now agnostic to the orchestration layer on top. So we have Copilot, for example, if you want to interact with the system. So it's more like, like we are talking now. I'm waiting for your response, and I respond to this again, as it's more like a chat experience. But there's many other more complex processes in a company where we have co-work. Basically, you're more like delegating a business process, and then the agent runs maybe in the background, and you're not watching the agent; it's coming back, and then either it needs more information or it comes back with a proposal. So basically, what it means now is, we don't have to deliver all these agent scenarios. We basically have changed. Users are interacting via Copilot or co-work with our systems. And that's basically how you can define what I want to do. As again, in the example of expense management, I don't have to create now an agent to say, take a picture of my invoice or emails coming in, itemize it, post my system. You can do this in your co-work app or Copilot. I'm just saying, here's a picture of my restaurant receipt, itemize it, post it to my dynamic system. And I think there's much more flexibility now, and I feel customers really like this independence. Also, they don't want to be, boxed in again, and every time they want to change something or they want to enhance something, they have to pay a lot of money to get it done. So I feel there is much more democratization how you can use your assets you have via this MCP server and this clear separation of the orchestration layers above it.
No, it's good. Oh gosh, it's fascinating. It's great stuff, Georg. I mean, I think it's a great time to be in the role you're in. I guess I'll say that. I think you guys are leading the way in a lot of dimensions, and in a very uncertain future, which is tough to do, but also fun, also exciting, at least from where I'm sitting.
Many CFOs specifically, so if you have been in this market for a while, as everybody's kind of agreeing, it's maybe the most exciting time for ERP.
Yeah.
I mean, there was always the promise that ERP will help you to increase your productivity. As again, at the end, it's about resource management. I would say if you would talk to customers, then maybe it's like flipping a coin. 50% would say, it kind of helped me. 50% would say, it was more expensive than planned. It took more time. It didn't really deliver on the value. But at least there's a conviction now that these new technologies can really help, because the thing in ERP is that there's still so many manual processes, and these kind of repetitive tasks, specifically in finance, I mean, they're just really ripe for this kind of innovations. And therefore, I think people really see now it's the time maybe to really deliver on the promise of ERP and really help companies to run much more efficient.
Yeah, you mentioned finance, Georg. It's I've been involved in quite a lot of really interesting discussions about the changing office of the CFO and how the CFO and his or her remit is changing for the better for the most part. And I'm kind of transitioning here a little bit to our speed round as we move towards adjourning for the day. But when you think about finance, there's zero room for error in many cases. I mean, there are people's jobs on the line for publicly traded companies, right? As we all know, and so and also to your point about readiness, I mean, there are accounting functions and massive time-consuming, repeated processes like financial close and things like that, and that are just ripe for this type of innovation. And I'm curious, when you think about the various finance roles and job functions, we're already seeing some of those jobs evolve, disappear, get replaced by new jobs or new functions. And I'm curious, from your seat, you're interfacing with a lot of these
Yeah.
finance organizations, and what jobs are you seeing in finance that are fading, and which ones do you think are emerging?
That's a lot of conversations exactly around the questions basically you have raised, and specifically CFOs are super interested in understanding a little bit where the buck is going.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel job titles are not disappearing overnight.
No.
I think it's more like the work inside those roles is changing. So if you mentioned, take this responsibility for a month-end close, which is a very tedious process, and I mean, you're running through it every month. And we were chasing this idea already many years ago. How could we move to a continuous close system process, which is the dream of many CFOs? Every day on the tip of my finger, I have a closed system, because the longer the close process basically takes, the longer you're kind of maneuvering in the dark, because you can only make decisions for the future if you kind of know the present. So that is a huge incentive. And instead of now spending days in manually reconciling ledgers, which I think this is one of the main activities they're doing, and trying to chase these variances, why is there a difference, trying to explain it. They're more like overseeing this continuous close process, and more like reviewing the exceptions the agents are surfacing. Also, agents can try to, of course, reconcile. There's a lot of rules, you can apply there. And at the end, maybe 80% of them you can resolve, and then 20% maybe the humans have to do. But it would be already a huge increase or reduction of time for the close process. So if I had to invent a new job title, I think it would be more like, it's a finance agent manager or a finance agent orchestrator, so someone who is supervising, govern, and continuously improves basically a team of agents, working across finance systems, helping, for example, the close process. So I think what's becoming obsolete isn't the finance professional. It's more like this repetitive works that gets automated, so people can hopefully spend more time, on judgments, on strategy, and business impact. And specifically in finance, I think the one drain every CFO has is, every time we grow our revenue, that's awesome, but I also have to grow the manual efforts to close the books to do that. And they would like to break out from, can I decouple my revenue growth from my cost growth, or at least let it grow slower would be already awesome.
Yeah, that's right. So you're expanding revenue and profit, right, at the same time.
I guess the CFO dream.
That's great. No, there's a lot there, but again, we're gonna keep driving to the end. I'll ask you a fill in the blank question here, Georg. The biggest thing people get wrong about AI in the enterprise is blank.
Also, the biggest thing people get wrong about AI in the enterprise, I think, is that they think it's a technology problem. Because I think the technology it's already there. It's working. Of course, it's not working for everything, but I mean, there's many use cases where it's working extremely well. But I think the real challenge is more like a leadership challenge, a change management challenge. So how do you adapt your organization, the way you're working to this new technology advancements?
Agreed. So back to maybe something you mentioned earlier about not going into a room thinking you're the smartest one there. What would your team say about how Georg runs a meeting?
I guess you have to ask them.
That's true. That's a fair question.
I mean, at least I hope. Yeah, I hope they would say maybe three things. Also
Yeah.
the first one, I come prepared. So at least I like to be prepared.
Yep.
The second one, I think, as I mentioned a little bit at the beginning, everybody has a voice. So I don't think the best ideas come from the most senior people. Specifically now in this technology disruption, it's almost like upside down, because
Right.
experience is sometimes, a good and a bad thing.
Yeah.
And the third one is, I always like to leave, or at least conclude with decisions. Also I don't like meetings for the, creating another meeting. Also I know it's sometimes a little more complicated, but using the time most efficient. And
Good. No, that's good. It's good stuff. Back again. Two more questions, and then we'll let you go, Georg. One is harkening back to your earlier days we talked about earlier when you started your career, and you have perspectives now, as we do, as we've spent years in this market, where big players like SAP and Microsoft, where now you've spent a good degree of time, and as you've seen those competitive dynamics now evolve, and like I said, constantly and very rapidly evolving as partnerships are struck, and like you said, where companies are deciding to be agnostic about areas where they used to be, fiercely protective, as an example, and these dynamics are changing a lot. And I'm just curious your point of view on competitive dynamics right now. Maybe pick SAP because you've been there and can speak to the time. Is how are you viewing competition these days? And again, this doesn't have to be a lengthy answer as we're concluding here, but just maybe a couple quick thoughts on: do you think a lot about competitors, or are you just really focused on customer intimacy? Obviously, it's not a binary. The answer is both. But how are you thinking about competition these days, and how is it driving your decision making?
Also, I think at least a lot about competition. Also, understanding who is your competitor. As I think also there is maybe a shift there.
Yep.
And of course, since I worked for SAP a long time, there's also a lot of time to reflect and think about. And I have a lot of respect for both companies. And it's also interesting. I think the companies are optimizing for very different problems to solve, which of course also took me a while, when I joined Microsoft. As SAP has, of course, a decade of expertise in running the world's most complex business processes. But Microsoft, has a really extraordinary ability to bring these new technologies, to hundreds of millions of users.
Yeah.
And these are very different starting points. And if you come from, from a different world, sometimes you're struggling to put these things together, and because it creates also different priorities. So I think, at least from my perspective, what I'm always trying to do is, how do you combine the good things of both sides? What's the customer benefit, when you try to understand both perspectives? So there's complex business processes, but I think all these productivity tools Microsoft is providing as well. I think these things are merging much more together, and I think the lines are not so clearly anymore. And to competition, there's of course I call it traditional competition, also specifically now in the business process side. But if you look at so the native AI first companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, it's also very interesting how they see the commercial business, how they try to enter. Also, at least a lot to learn from how they do it without this, 20 years of experience. As I said, sometimes it's a good thing, but sometimes also maybe keeps you too much in your own little box, how you're thinking.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No, I agree with that. Well, last question, Georg. This is, if Mr. Satya Nadella were sitting here with us, which of course he's not, and you were able to, or you and I, let's just say, were able to ask him one question, any question, what would you suggest we should ask, and what do you think his response would be through the lens of helping Microsoft customers and maybe prospects get a better grasp of, what do they stand to gain from working with Microsoft in the ERP space?
If Satya would be sitting here, so my first reaction would be, wow, Mark, you really upgraded your guest list. Yeah. That's a big one.
That's true. That's true.
On the question, in the context now of dynamics, and trying now to assemble a little bit also what Satya was saying specifically now, Build Conference was very interesting. It's a little bit, how he would describe, this AI agents unbundling traditional SaaS software or SaaS stack, so as Dynamics basically is evolving into this AI first business platform, what does he believe will become this source of differentiation, as we just talked about competition as well, as the thing customers simply cannot replace, and how would this basically change the way we think about our ERP products, for example, or CM products today? This could be one question, at least I was asking myself a couple of times if I'm trying to put all these puzzle pieces together from Satya's message as he's doing publicly. Yeah?
Great. No, that's great. Yeah, obviously he's got a lot on his mind for sure, but that's very astute. Well, good. Well, Georg, this has been tremendous. And I think we could go on for hours, but you don't have them, I don't have them, so we're going to adjourn for now. And I want to thank you genuinely, Georg, for taking the time. Always a pleasure to chat with you and learn about where you're headed and what you're learning, because I think you're right. We're all learning at this stage, and we all have different perspectives on what we should be planning for in the near future and maybe even medium-term future. So thank you for that. I know everyone else benefited. We've got lots of people in this community that are trying to navigate, obviously, finance workflow, but also supply chain and CRM and marketing and production and obviously HR and accounting and things. So all very much in scope for ERP. So thank you for your time today. Thank you everyone for listening. Appreciate your ongoing attendance and participation in our community. We will catch you next time on the next episode of the Enterprise Edge. Until then, take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mark.